Philosophical thoughts in education. Here are the philosophers and their thoughts on education, on what to be taught and how learners should be taught. John Locke, 1632 to 1704, the empiricist educator. The English philosopher and political theorist John Locke laid much of the groundwork for the Enlightenment and made central contribution to the development of liberalism. Trained in medicine, he was the key advocate of the empirical approaches of the scientific revolution. In his essay concerning human understanding, he advanced the theory of the self as a blank page, with knowledge and identity arising from the accumulated experience. Here are his thoughts on education. Acquire knowledge about the world through senses, learning by doing and by interacting with the environment. Simple ideas become more complex through comparison, reflection, and generalization, or the inductive method. Question the long traditional view that knowledge came exclusively from literary sources, particularly the Greek and Latin classic. Opposed the divine rights of king theory, which he held that the monarch had the right to be unquestioned and absolute ruler over his subject. Political order should be based upon a contract between the people and the government. Aristocrats are not destined by birth to be rulers. People were to establish their own government and select their own political leaders from among themselves. Civic education is necessary. People should be educated to govern themselves intelligently and responsibly. For John Locke, education is not acquisition of knowledge contained in the great books. It is learners interacting with concrete experience, comparing. The learner is an active, not a passive agent of his or her own learning. From the social dimension, education is seeing citizens participate actively and intelligently in establishing their own government and in choosing who will govern them from among themselves because they are convinced that no one person is destined to be ruler forever. Herbert Spencer, 1820 to 1903, The Utilitarian Education. Herbert Spencer was an English philosopher, biologist, anthropologist, sociologist, famous for his hypothesis in social Darwinism, whereby superior physical force shapes history. Spencer's concept of survival of the fittest means that human development had gone through an evolutionary series of stages from the simple to the complex and from the uniform to more specialized kind of activity. Social development had taken places according to an evolutionary process by which simple homogeneous societies had evolved to more complex societal systems characterized with humanistic and classical education. Industrialized society required vocational and professional education based on scientific and practical utilitarian objectives rather than the very general educational goals associated with humanistic and classical education. Curriculum should emphasize the practical, utilitarian, and scientific subject that help humankind master the environment. Was not inclined to rote learning. Schooling must be related to life and to the activities needed to earn a living. Curriculum must be arranged according to their contribution to human survival and progress. Science and other subjects that sustain human life and prosperity should have curricular priority since it aids in the performance of life activities. Individual competition leads to social progress. He who is fittest survives. Specialized education of Spencer versus the general education. To survive in a complex society, Spencer favors specialized education over that of the general education. We are in need of social engineers who can combine harmoniously the findings of specialized knowledge. This is particularly true in the field of medicine. The expert who concentrates on a limited field is useful, but if he loses sight of the interdependence of things, he becomes a man who knows more and more about less and less. We must be warned of the deadly peril over specialism. Of course, we do not prefer the other extreme, the superficial person who knows less and less about more and more. Spencer's survival of the fittest. He who is fittest survives. Individual competition leads to social progress. The competition in class is what advocates a whole child approach and socio-emotional learning or SEL. atmosphere negate. The whole child approach is a powerful tool for self-focused schools has tenets. Each student learns in an environment that is physically and emotionally safe for students and adults. And each student has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified and caring adults. Freire 2019. Highlighted words point to no competition, for competition works against an emotionally safe environment. John Dewey, 1859 to 1952, Learning Thoughts Through Experience. John Dewey was an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer whose ideas has been influential in education and social reform. He was one of the most prominent American scholars in the half of the 20th century. According to Dewey, education is a social process, and so school is intimately related to the society that it serves. Children are socially active human beings who want to explore their environment and gain control over it. Education is a social process by which the immature members of the group, especially the children, are brought to participate in the society. The school is a special environment established by members of society for the purpose of simplifying, purifying, and integrating the social experience of the group so that it can be understood, examined, and used by its children. The sole purpose of education is to contribute to the personal and social growth of individuals. The steps of the scientific or reflected method, which are extremely important in Dewey's educational theory, are as follows. The learner has a genuine situation of experience involvement in an activity in which he or she is interested. Within this experience, the learner has a genuine problem that stimulates thinking. The learner possesses the information or does research to acquire the information needed to solve the problem. The learner develops possible and tentative solutions that may solve the problem. The learner tests the solutions by applying them to the problem. In this one way, one discovers their validity for one's self. The fund of knowledge of the human race, past ideas, discoveries, and invention, was to be used as the material for dealing with the problems. This accumulated wisdom of cultural heritage has to be tested. If it serves human purposes, it becomes part of the reconstructed experience. The school is a social, scientific, and democratic. The school introduces children to society and their heritage. The school as a miniature society is a means of bringing children into the social participation. The school is scientific in a sense that it is a social laboratory in which children and youth could test their ideas and values. In here, the children or learners acquires the disposition and procedures associated with scientific or reflective thinking and acting. The school is democratic because the learner is free to test all ideas, values, and belief. Cultural heritage, customs, and institutions are all subject to critical inquiry, investigation, and reconstruction. School should be used by all, it being a democratic institution. No barrier of costume and prejudice segregate people. People ought to work together to solve common problems. The authoritarian or coercive style of administration and teaching is out of place because they block genuine integrity and dialogue. Education is a social activity, and the school is a social agency that helps shape human character and behavior. Values are relative, but sharing and cooperation and democracy are significant human values that should be encouraged by schools. For Dewey, the fund of knowledge of the human race does not disregard the accumulated wisdom of the past. These past ideas, discoveries, and invention, our cultural heritage, will be used as the material for dealing with problems and so will be tested. If they are of help, they become part of the reconstructed experience. If they are not totally accurate, they will still be part of the reconstructed experience. This means that the ideal learner for Dewey is not just one who can learn by doing, sample, conduct an experiment, but one who can connect accumulated wisdom of the past to the present. Schools are for the people and by the people. Schools are democratic institutions where everyone, regardless of the age, ethnicity, social status, is welcome and is encouraged to participate in a democratic process of decision making. Learners and stakeholders practice and experience democracy in schools. George Counts, 1889 to 1974, building a new social order. George Sylvester Counts was an American educator and influential education theorist. An early proponent of the progressive education movement of John Dewey, Counts became its leading critic affiliated with the school of social Reconstructionism in education. Education is not based on eternal truth but is relative to the particular society living at a given time and place. By aligning themselves with groups they want to change society, schools should cope with social change that arises from technology. There is a cultural lag between material progress and social institutions and ethical values. Instruction should incorporate a content of social useful nature and the problem-solving methodology. Students who encourage to work on problems that have social significance. Schools become instrument for social improvement rather than an agency for preserving the status quo. Teachers should lead society rather than follow it. Teachers are agents of change. Teachers are called on how to make important choices in the controversial areas of economics, politics, and morality because if they fail to do so, others should make the decision for them. Schools ought to provide an education that afford equal learning opportunities to all students. Schools and teachers as agents of change. For George Counts, schools and teachers should be agents of change. Schools are considered instruments for social improvement rather than the agencies for preserving the status quo. Whatever change we work for should always be change for the better, not just change for the sake of change. Teachers are called to make decisions on controversial issues. Not to make decision is to actually making a decision. Dewey, problem solving should be dominant method for instruction. Lag between material progress and ethical values. Counts assert that there is a cultural lag between material progress and social institution and ethical values. Material progress of humankind is very evident, but moral and ethical development seems to have lagged behind. A friend once wrote, "The Egyptians have moral problems that plague humankind. Indeed, with science and technology, we have become very powerful and yet powerless. We have conquered a number of diseases and even postponed death for many. We have conquered aging, the planets, the sea, but we have not conquered ourselves." Theodore Brumeld, 1904 to 1987, Social Reconstructionism. Theodore Brumeld was a philosopher and educator who supported the educational philosophy of social reconstructionism. The name implies social reconstructionism is a philosophy that emphasizes the reformation of society. Social reconstructionists tend that humankind has moved from agricultural to rural society to an urban and technological society. There is a serious lag in cultural adaptation to the realities of a technological society. Humankind has yet to reconstruct its values in order to catch up with the changes in technological order. An organized education has a major role to play in reducing the gap between the values of the culture and technology. So the social reconstructionist asserts that schools should critically examine present culture and inconsistencies, controversies, and conflicts to build a new society, not just to change society. Do more than reform the social and educational status quo. It should seek to create a new society. Humankind is in a state of profound cultural crisis. If schools reflect the dominant social values, then organized education will merely transmit the social ills that are symptoms of pervasive problems and affliction that beset humankind. The only legitimate goal is to truly human education is to create a world order in which people are in control of their own destiny. In an era of nuclear weapons, the social reconstructionists see an urgent need for society to reconstruct itself before it destroys itself. The era is an era of interdependence, and so education must be international in scope for global citizenship. For the social reconstructionist, education is designed to awaken students' consciousness about social problems and to engage them actively in problem solving. Social reconstructionists are firmly committed to equal and equity in both society and education. Barriers of economic class and racial discrimination should be eradicated. They also emphasize the idea of an interdependent world. The quality of life needs to be considered and enhanced on a global basis. Dewey and George Count, social reconstructionist Bromold believe in active problem solving as a method of teaching and learning. Social reconstructionists are convinced that education is not a privilege of the few, but a right to be enjoyed by all. Education is a right that all citizens, regardless of race and social status, must enjoy.
Paulo Freire from 1921 to 1997, A Critical Pedagogy. Paulo Regulus Neves Freire was a Brazilian educator and philosopher who was leading advocate of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy and dialogue versus the banking model of education. Freire, a critical theorist, like social reconstructionists, believed that systems must be changed to overcome oppression and improve human conditions. Education and literacy are the vehicle of social change. In his view, humans must learn to resist oppression and not become victims nor oppress others. To do so requires dialogue and critical consciousness, the development of awareness to overcome domination and oppression. Rather than teaching as banking, in which the educator deposits information into students' heads, Freire saw teaching and learning as a process of inquiry in which the child must invent and reinvent the world. Teachers must not see themselves as the sole possessors of knowledge and their students as empty receptacles. He calls this pedagogical approach the banking method of education. A democratic relationship between the teacher and her students is necessary in order for the gentization process to take place. Freire's critical pedagogy is problem-posing education. A central element of Freire's pedagogy is dialogue. It is love and respect that allow us to engage people in dialogue and to discover ourselves in the process and learn from one another. By its nature, dialogue is not something that can be imposed. Instead, genuine dialogue is characterized by respect of the parties involved toward one another. We develop a tolerant sensibility during the dialogue process, and it's only when we come to tolerate the points of view and ways of being others that we might be able to learn from them and about ourselves. In the process, the dialogue means the presence of equality, mutual recognition, affirmation of people, a sense of solidarity, people, and remaining open to questions. Dialogue is the basis for critical and problem-posing pedagogy, as opposed to banking education, where there is no discussion, only the imposition of the teacher's ideas on the students. All of these education philosophers point to the need of interacting with others and of creating a community of inquiry. As Charles Sanders Peirce put it, the community of inquiry is a group of persons involved in inquiry, investigating more or less the same question or problem, and developing through their exchanges a better understanding both of the question as well as the probable solutions. Community of inquiry will engage learners in active problem solving.